Hi everybody. In this video, I just want to go over the very basics of working with the pen tool in Illustrator. And to do that, we are just going to trace over a sketch of a heart because that shape will help me teach you the two different types of anchor points you need to know to work with the pen tool. So to get started, I just have a blank document open. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my fill, and I'm going to make sure that my stroke is visible and turned up just a little bit so you can see what I'm working with here. So the pen tool, you'll find it over here in your toolbar. You can also open it up by pressing P on your keyboard. And once you start clicking in your document, the pen tool will place anchor points. And between those anchor points, it will draw a path. If you enclose that path by clicking on your starting point, this will become an enclosed shape, and you can add a fill to that shape. Another quick tip, you can swap your fill and your stroke if you have a shape selected and hit Shift and X. So anchor points can be corners like they are here, or they can be smooth, which means you can round that corner. In order to control what type of point you're creating, there are a few ways to do it. The first way is when you're placing your point, let me zoom in here so you can see, click and drag out. So I'm holding my mouse button down, and you will get these handles. And what those handles do, if I switch to my direct selection tool and select that point, you'll see that I can drag these out, and those handles influence the curvature of this path. These are what are called Bezier curves, and this is how all vector software will draw shapes and paths, so it's important to get comfortable with these. Some other tips here, you can control the directionality of these. If you hold Shift, you will be able to snap to a perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical with your handles. And then the way these work is the further out your points go, the more influence this side of the curve has on that curve. So if I pull this way in, you'll see that I'm not getting a very big curve. If I pull this out, you'll see that it's almost as if this side of the path has a lot more weight over the control of that curve. The other way to do this is by selecting your anchor point. Over here in your properties panel, you can convert a point from a smooth point to a corner, or from a corner to a smooth point. But what happens if you want to transition from one to the other? So to do this, you can break these handles to transition from a smooth to a corner. And you can do that with the direct selection tool by holding Alt on your keyboard. I believe it's Option on the Mac. And you'll see that when I drag this point now, this handle functions independently of this one over here. Okay, one other way to transition between these points, besides by using the convert over here after selecting the point, is by using your anchor point tool. And this is hidden under your pen tool if you click and hold. Shift-C is your shortcut, but while you're using your pen tool, you can also hold Alt, and that is what gives you your anchor point tool. But when I have this selected, I can now click and drag out on these points, or change the direction of those handles independently of the other side here. Okay, so now that we know how to work with the pen tool, I want to talk about some best practices here. It's really easy for this to get out of hand if you're just kind of placing points willy-nilly. So just as an example here, let's start to pull in our heart shape. And let's just rough this shape in. So I've just dragged and dropped my sketch. And then I am going to turn the opacity of this layer down just a little bit. And then I'm going to lock this layer so I don't accidentally move it. So if I were to just rough this shape in and just try to like do it all perfect, kind of as I go, this is going to turn out kind of bad, because you're not going to get it perfect your first time. And then if you want to change something after the fact, say for example, I want to alter this curve. Maybe I could place another point here and then try to pull this out. But now I have all these, it gets kind of bumpy because we have so many points that this path is trying to transition between. It can become really difficult, especially if you're working with complex shapes, to get a nice, smooth, professional vector drawing. So the best practice here is to work with as few points as possible, and to do your best to only place points on what are called tangent lines. And what tangent lines are the places on a curve where you can keep your handles perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. There are some places where that just doesn't work out, but wherever you can, it's a great practice to try and keep your points vertically, perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. So to find those tangent lines, what I mean by those, I'm just going to pull up my ruler up here and I'm going to click and drag down to create a guide. So your tangent line is, if you were to create a guide, it's the spot on your shape or on your drawing where a perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal line just touches the apex of that curve. And so like this is the tangent line around this curve here. This is the tangent line on the top of the curve here. There could be an argument made that instead you would place it kind of on the diagonal here, but for the purposes of this demo, this is where I'm going to place those. So now if I draw my curve and I make sure I'm placing my anchor points on those tangent lines, it becomes much more manageable. So obviously the sketch isn't perfect, so I'm just going to eyeball where this should be up here. And we can always edit our path after the fact. So what I'm doing here, I'm clicking and dragging this out, and I'm looking at the left side of this path, and then once I get that where I want it, I'm going to break it by holding Alt, and I'm going to pull this right side up to nearly match. Place another point on the tangent here, and then our tangent over here would be right about even with this one if we were great drawers. And then I'll complete this down here. And now I can go back in, and because there's relatively few points here, it becomes much easier to manipulate the shape of this heart. So I could kind of clean this up as I wanted to. Maybe I want to pull these down, and I want this to be a much more angular transition down at the bottom here. So I still don't like that sharp corner, so I could grab these points and just use the radius option here to round those out a little bit, and that will actually place additional anchor points around those curves. And then I'll just go ahead and fill this in, and we'll call this good enough for this demo. Okay, and there you have it. Those are the very basics of working with the pen tool. Obviously there's a lot more that you can learn here, but this should give you enough to get up and running between this and our exercise with drawing with basic shapes. So until then, I will see you next time.